Hello, and welcome to the inaugural Reuters event, Transform USA 2020 virtual event. Over the next 2 days, we'll be presenting you with new ideas, actionable insights on the need and opportunity for business to put sustainability and resilience at the heart of the US recovery. The challenge and the change ahead of us will take decades, but the work and ambition shown now will be what we see delivered in the next 3, 5, and 10 years' time. So it's imperative that we identify new technologies, innovative strategies, and potential new partnerships to scale up the work that's being done now. And our aim at Reuters events and the next 2 days is to equip you with the ideas, the connections, and the answers to fulfill the transformation ahead of us. It's not going to be easy, but we hope to give you the ideas to at least start making the steps. Before we dive into the sessions, I'd like to thank our event partners for helping support and build this year's virtual event: Liberty Mutual Insurance, Guidehouse, TrueStar Energy, Emphasis, Novisto, E2S, Green and Phoenix Waste Solutions. And straight off the bat, I'm pleased to say we're joined by one of our lead event partners, Liberty Mutual Insurance, who've been helping us deliver our opening keynote discussion titled Delivering a Green, Clean and Inclusive Rebuild Post-COVID-19. Leading the discussion, we have Rakhi Kumar, Senior Vice President, Sustainability Solutions at Liberty Mutual, Perez, SVP and Chief Communications, Public Affairs, Sustainability and Marketing Assets Officer, the Coca-Cola Company, Naas, Vice President and Managing Director for International Public Affairs, UPS, Sophie Beckham, CSO at International Paper, and Dave Stangis, the former CSO at Campbell Soup and now CEO and founder of 21C Impact. For those that haven't joined us for a virtual event, this session is live. It's 1 hour long, and that means one thing: they're here to answer your questions throughout the discussion. So please use the Q&A box to the right of your screen there. But now it's my pleasure to hand over to Dave to chair the discussion and get this session underway. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Liam. It's really an honor to kick this session off and kick this conference off. There are some great speakers, and I know I'm honored to moderate this panel with some amazing leaders of some amazing companies that have been in the news. And everybody knows these companies on this panel, and several of you probably know our panelists. And it's really great to have them all here to kick this off and to plant some seeds for the rest of this conference over the next couple of days. So we're going to make this pretty free-flowing. This is a broad topic, trying to find ways to build back better, to learn from the environment that we're in right now, but also to help our companies really position themselves to take some of the signals that we're hearing today, pivot and transition to the front foot, and really come out of this even stronger than we were going in before. So we're going to do a couple round of questions and let our panelists introduce themselves and some of their scope, and then talking about some of the work they're doing today in their companies to drive change and to frankly position to bring back better. And a lot of this stuff is happening right now. These companies aren't waiting, and you'll hear some of the sustainability initiatives, corporate citizenship, ESG, circular work has been ongoing throughout the pandemic. So I'm just going to start and go around the table, the virtual table here, and let each of you introduce yourselves a little bit and the scope that you own and kind of drive in the company. We'll get into some details in the next round, but this is a chance to really let yourself introduce yourself to this crowd and let them understand a little bit more about your day-to-day. So I'll start with Rakhi.
Yeah, hello everyone, and good afternoon, good morning to all of you. I'm Rakhi Kumar. I head up our Sustainability Solutions team at Liberty Mutual. This team is relatively new. We really got together towards May of this year, and which means I onboarded during a pandemic. The role that we're doing at Liberty is actually leading efforts to integrate sustainability across our entire enterprise. And for that, it includes at the operational level, within the underwriting book of business, as well as on the investment book of business. So we are partnering with all the businesses to get them to integrate sustainability. And we define sustainability or integration of sustainability into creating a sustainability mindset and building strategies that are informed by some of the ESG factors that we want that we want to shape and we want to roll in shaping for the world, to build the world of tomorrow. And prior to Liberty, I was at State Street Global Advisors, where I was heading up the ESG investing business as well as the asset stewardship or proxy voting engagements. I've spoken to many of my colleagues here on the panel, sitting on the other side of the table.
That's great, Rakhi. I can see some nodding heads. You know, we've obviously worked together, some of us. B, how about you?
Thanks, Dave. And thank you very much for having me join this. What an esteemed group of panelists here. So I feel very honored and flattered. So I have had a chance to meet some of the other panelists and follow their work as well. I've been at Coke for 26 years now. I've been involved in sustainability since 2011, and it was fairly new to me. The role I play today, fast forward, to today's situation, is I have communications, our sustainability work, public policy included in there, our global foundation, as well as I will call it a variety of partnerships, from some sponsorships in sports and entertainment to our licensing division. And it's been really interesting because during this time, the role that I love the most and feel is the most critical to the long-term survival of any business is the work in sustainability and public policy. And how do we ensure that communities emerge stronger and build back better, which means that businesses will ultimately benefit from that, but the community has to go first. And so what's important to me is to see where ESG is today. And that's really important in terms of the actions that we're all driving in our accountabilities. What we're seeing today is that companies have to lean in. And so during these last couple of months, the work that I've been focused on the most is, while we've seen the balance of what the pandemic has done in terms of lockdowns means that maybe recyclers are not out there collecting, packaging waste or material waste. So how do you create that circular economy during this time? We've had to really focus in the last few months in terms of the work we focus on to accelerate where we can and to be able to be ready to support the areas of focus that have had some either stumbling blocks or barriers due to the pandemic and the other situations. So for me, it's really been phenomenal to see the work that I'm able to partner with our bottling system, other partners across business, as well as governments and different NGOs, especially during this time, to see that work accelerate. So for me, I just feel, honored and really privileged to run an amazing area of our business that I believe will drive change for many generations to come.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think I've talked to a lot of our peers in other forums, and there's definitely a sense of gratitude for some of the abilities that we have, right, to be working with these great companies and continuing to drive change. Penny, I'll turn it over to you for an intro.
Great, thank you all. Hi, I'm Penny Naas. I'm president for International Public Affairs, and I also have the overall sustainability strategy for UPS. So when I think about what we've been working on and some of the things we've had to confront in the past 6 to 9 months, UPS has been an essential service provider and has really had to run probably at double our normal capacity just to keep the world running for the past period. We've seen a lot of social unrest and change going on around the world as well, which has impacted our 520,000 employees globally. And we've seen a lot of other natural disasters and other things take place that have also been challenging for us as we've continued to try to serve during the pandemic. So as we think about what we've been working on, we've had to balance both our environmental impact with the essential services we're providing, doing what we can where we can, seeing a lot of other of the infrastructure that has taken a step sideways, creating both opportunities and challenges for the world. But in addition, we've also focused on how can we help with that resilience and those pivots in the world at the moment with regards to the digital space, helping companies whose doors may be shut, but who still want to be able to try to serve their customers and earn a living during this process. And last, we've been working with our employees. Being an essential service provider is great, but it also comes with, and I think all of us have experienced certain challenges in the adaptation during this period, none more so than when it's combined with some of the social issues we've seen. So we've launched a few initiatives in that area that we're extremely proud of, and I'll be happy to talk about later in the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Penny. I know I've taken a chance to thank my UPS drivers that I see in my neighborhood because they're all running around like crazy these days. So thanks to them. Hey, Sophie, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thanks, Dave. I'm really pleased to be with this group as well, and it's a nice segue from Penny to me. UPS is delivering a lot of the parcels that are packaged in packaging made by International Paper. So I would say with the other very well-known brands on this call, International Paper is a global packaging pulp and paper company. Our business is really transforming renewable resources into the products that people depend on every day, and never more so than I think in the last 6 to 9 months. Interestingly, I'm in a new role. The Chief Sustainability Officer was created in the beginning of 2020. So we really I started the year off with a great move for me, and a really exceptional, I think, public commitment by the company to say, hey, we're going to put sustainability issues front and center, and we want to have somebody who's going to be able to sort of lead those efforts with a strong team of people and support our businesses across the board and across our value chain. For both me and the company, actually, our origins are in forest stewardship. I'm a forester by education, and International Paper's entire business depends on the sustainability of forests. So taking that stewardship ethic from our sourcing and that renewable raw material and taking it through our value chain to transform it into the products that people use every day, and thinking beyond our four walls, really, how do we have a positive impact outside of our supply chain through partnerships? And so my role is really helping to deliver on those key areas in order to advance our vision to be among the most successful, sustainable, and responsible companies in the world. And I would really echo what Penny has said. Our focus in the last 6 to 9 months as an essential business has been on keeping our employees healthy and safe, and continuing to produce those essential goods that keep global supply chains running, and allow people to enjoy those goods and services every day. So I look forward to diving more into some of the initiatives we're working on to advance that.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. It's some of my old backgrounds in health and safety, and it's amazing how the human capital, for lack of some of these better terms, has gone right to the top of the agenda from a strategic perspective. I've been talking to some of the Human Capital Coalition members and some of the indices and reporting, and it's an amazing thing to see. It's good. Some of us have wished it's always been there, but it's definitely, we hope it sticks in this case. The thing that I find interesting with this panel, and I hope some of the audience tunes into it as well, is we basically have a microcosm of the entire global economy, right, on this panel, right? If I'm an economist or an investor, what else? I mean, how you couldn't put together a better panel between food and beverage and finance and insurance, and UPS, which is everywhere in the world, International Paper, which is kind of touches everything. But on this next round, I'll kind of go in reverse order for everybody. And Sophie, it'd be interesting to hear, what's going on day to day. You teed it up a little bit in terms of the people work, but from a sustainability, and we can throw the terms around, but clean, green, inclusive is pretty broad. But what kind of things are happening in your company today? What's changed in your role, and what do you think's going to stick? And really just open the window for us a little bit. And it's the same question for everybody. We'll just kind of go around and listen to what these brands and leaders are doing these days.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I mentioned that the Chief Sustainability Officer role was created earlier this year, and that happened at the same time that we released our Vision 2030 goals. So again, we sort of went into the pandemic saying, okay, we have a broad suite of ambitious goals. They span our sourcing, our operations, our people and communities, and our products. How can we use this time where the focus is, again, on sort of health and safety of our employees and the communities where we work? How can we use this time to do a really deep dive and think a lot about implementation from January 1st, 2021, which is when these goals really are going to take off. So I think that we, myself and my team and others within our company, have, in addition to kind of supporting other initiatives, really started to look at what is implementation design, how do we ensure that we have the right metrics in place and that we can move forward while not taking up bandwidth that's really important to focus on people right now. And my observation about that is that there was a little bit of a pause in March and April where everybody kind of didn't know what to do and where we were going to go. And then we all sort of regrouped and we refocused. And I think we've used this space to be able to kind of sharpen our pencils on how we go forward. And what in my mind has helped us is some momentum that we're seeing around us that really helps all of us as a reminder or as sort of a refocus that there are bridges to a more sustainable future. Our stakeholders are asking that of us all the time. And the issues of racial inequality, kind of helping to refocus companies on D&I strategies. We had goals in place back in January that were really helping our company move forward in this area, but it helped reinforce the intention and ambition that we've set. Also, you mentioned circularity. I think this drive towards circularity is wrapping around everything right now. It's wrapping around how we think about entire value chains. And nowhere has this opportunity been more clear than in these fiber-based kind of forest product supply chains. And so that's where we feel like we have a real opportunity to advance, whether it's coming from a renewable resource or it's coming from a recovered and recycled material. We're able to kind of really look more closely at how can we become more circular from our naturally kind of circular start. And I think also what we're seeing is a real focus on things like renewability and regenerative. And if we take those concepts and sort of apply them to the work we're doing, I feel like we can continue to see that this forest stewardship model, this raw material sourcing model that we've been looking at is central to our sustainable future in the sense that we have to continue to invest in natural capital. We can't sort of ignore the natural capital, even though the human capital piece that you mentioned is so important and so in focus right now. And I think ultimately where that all leads us is true integration of the sustainability strategy with the business strategy. And so what we're aiming for is that our business strategy is delivering these sustainable outcomes, that it's not kind of an add-on. And in that sense, I think the other reflection I would share is that over the last few months, rather than see our 4 goals as these kind of silos that stand outside or stand independently, there's tremendous interdependence between, for example, our work with forest landowners connecting us to building more resilient communities, or the ways in which our work on water stewardship intersects with forests. And I think that once you recognize that sort of interdependence, that's when you can really focus on systemic change, right? Because it's all connected. There's a system here. We can bring other partners into this same picture and help us kind of scale up and amplify where we know that we can't do it alone. So I think that's kind of covering a lot. It's covering the broad suite of the sort of external trends we're seeing, the ways in which we are synthesizing that in order to make sure that we are working on the right things, we continue to advance our Vision 2030 work, and that ultimately we are kind of integrating all of this into our core business model. And I'll just close by saying that the other piece of this that I think has been really interesting to observe is the question, well, what can we learn from COVID and the reaction? And I think that it's encouraging to see people galvanizing to protect each other, right? To protect ourselves and protect each other, and to be able to address the pandemic. And although some days it feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or maybe it's the other way around, I do think we are sort of seeing people wake up to say, how can we come together collectively to create change? And that there's got to be great things we can learn from that to take into other critical issues of climate, long-term sustainability, biodiversity, natural resource use, et cetera. So I'm encouraged by that, and looking to really my peers and to others on this call to help. Let's help each other kind of unpack this and see where we can go from here. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I've been surprised to see the launch of new goals, like, big, hairy, audacious goals coming out from companies. The reporting hasn't stopped. And as you know, two things that you mentioned, I think are themes I've seen, and I'm sure they'll come out in the other conversation, is this renewable, regenerative, circular piece that people are talking about, and the really positive thing is the connection between human and natural capital. Right now that things are both coming up on the agenda, it's great to see these things coming together at a high priority. Penny, how about UPS?
So let me start a little bit, because I think when we think about COVID and what's going on, the question is, one of this is going to be a temporary change, and one of this is a structural change. So back in March, at least in the United States, in a 2-week period, we accelerated the work from home trend by 20 years, but didn't necessarily have the tools at that moment to do it. Similarly, we're seeing what we think are probably structural changes in the development of e-commerce. So, and we think it's probably leapfrog 5 to 10 years in terms of where and how that retail evolution is taking off in certain parts of the world. So there are people who have never done a telemedicine appointment who have had to do one in the last 6 months, and I think found it not such a bad experience. So the questions for us, and as we think about things, is what are permanent shifts that for our sustainability environmental strategy we need to take into account, because we really had to do a bunch of stuff just to get stuff going. So in some sense, there's pros and cons to this for UPS. We still have our goals. We have not adjusted them at this stage, but they are going to be impacted by some of the things that have happened in the last 6 months. 49% of aircraft went down and were taken offline flying between the United States and Europe. And so with that, with all the passengers coming down, you also saw the belly space of aircraft come down. And so the airlines are probably going to be reporting better emissions, but we at UPS had to put more planes up to move things back and forth because of that capacity that came down. Similarly, going back to the deliveries, we've had such a spike in deliveries. It's fantastic, because every time we deliver, that's somebody not getting their car and potentially going to a store and then coming home. So we eliminate those individual trips with our consolidated deliveries that we do, but we have been doing more of them. So overall, the world may be better at the end of this, but we're going to have to evaluate our goals post all of what we're going through to say, okay, how do we shift and achieve these goals now moving forward, given these structural changes that are going on. Now, resilient supply chains is something that we've also seen, and we've been trying to work with a lot of our customers and others with regards to this. So we've been counseling tens, if not hundreds of thousands of businesses, and then helping also link up these diverse suppliers into new supply chains, because that's going to be also incredibly important coming out of this, is that resilience that people need to build into their supply chains moving forward. And again, going back to a point Sophie made, if this is good business, then it's going to become sustainable as well. And so we're also trying to make sure we look at diverse communities, people we haven't traditionally had in a lot of supply chains, and figuring out how do we adjust that at this period of time. The last thing I want to go to, again, on the D&I front, we like many, we have a new CEO, and on her first day in office, she put out a statement. She started on June 1st, and there were things going on in Minnesota and in Georgia and elsewhere that she felt it was important to comment on. And she stood up right away, and an equity and social justice task force inside UPS. We're lobbying on behalf of hate crime bills that have been languishing or not moving quite as quickly, that have now passed as a result of efforts many of us have been undertaken. We've all been trained on unconscious bias training inside UPS, taking advantage of the fact that many like me are sitting in their basements, doing this in an online experience. We've continued to look at volunteer hours from a socially distanced perspective, and this month is our Global Volunteer Month, and we've put a premium on volunteering for organizations for underserved communities. And we've already met our goal with regards to planting. We had, like many companies, we had a tree planting goal. We've met our target ahead of time. So we're going to continue, and we're going to continue again by looking at where can we do plantings on Indigenous grounds in underserved communities, building up those green spaces globally. So those are a couple of the things we're doing and thinking about in this period of, I think, tremendous change that's going on. With that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Penny. Yeah, and a couple, I didn't realize it, but it's clearly front and center. We can't all just shove our greenhouse gas emissions to UPS as much as we'd like to, or FedEx, right? I mean, that's something that has to get factored in long term. And then the other thing I think that you brought up that I know there's no way the companies on this call, right, and the brands that you guys represent can avoid just being, taking a role or being pushed one way or the other in public policy. And that's part of your role. I know, B, you touch on some of this as well. It's a big thing. And I know the other companies are in that space as well. Our employees are asking us to be stronger and take public positions. And frankly, the world's expecting some of us as well. B, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about what you're seeing day to day. What's changed? What do you think is temporary and what's long lasting? Those were great points.
Thanks, Dave. Well, first, I want to say to Penny, I know Carol Tomei, your new CEO, and she is fabulous. We've done community work together in Atlanta, so I can tell you that she has actually actioned what she discusses and talks about. So I'm excited for you and for everyone at UPS. And, I want to jump off a little bit of the inclusive piece for a moment as we think of, green, clean, and inclusive. I was raised by a mother who was a human relations commissioner for state of Maryland for 20 years. She was chairperson for the last several years of her appointment. And I remember going to watch her when I was younger rule on these different cases, and I was just a young girl. And one day she said to me, she said, remember when you grow up that representation is not enough. Inclusive means having people's points of views at the table and really listening. And sometimes that means being uncomfortable because you're going to have to do things that are hard and difficult, but they're right. And so that always has stayed in the back of my mind. And when I was fortunate to take on the role of sustainability at Coke, that was always loud and clear. When I think of inclusive in this space, it goes beyond just making sure that the people have the points of views heard at the table. Are the policies representing those points of views? Is the innovation moving forward? How are we thinking about really taking a look at how society and business and government and everyone will emerge stronger together? And so recently, our chairman and CEO was at an investor conference, and he really challenged and talked about, for us, we can talk about what we need to do to drive better profit, but what we need to really talk about is, will society be better when we all emerge from this? Because if society is not better and hasn't been strengthened, then really business is not going to, be strengthened either. We're going to, those are definitely, very deeply connected. And so what can we do to make sure that society is emerging stronger and put that at the heart and center? And that is good business, which is what you've just heard from Sophie, from Penny, and what you've talked about. And what's different, I believe, today, and what's different that the pandemic has shown is just like it's accelerated people being able to work in a remote environment, and frankly, sometimes increased collaboration, because now you can collaborate across the world, multiple time zones, multiple disciplines. I'm sure people are watching this panel right now who maybe wouldn't have been to it before because of whatever situation or some of the limitations. Now with digital, that's accelerated. I'd say also in sustainability, it's put an increased focus in terms of what are the societal needs and what do people need in order to have our society be better than what it was pre-pandemic even. And I've seen a lot more collaboration in terms of even just, last week with the United Nations and the UN Compact and the principles it just launched, and how business is recommitted. At the same time, you're hearing a lot of the CEOs start to launch the ESG frameworks and make sure that it really is how they're reporting out. And you mentioned that, Dave, that the reporting hasn't stopped. We just, during the pandemic in April, launched our other annual sustainability and business report, because the work can't stop. It actually needs to keep going. How you do the work is different. And if I think of Coca-Cola's unique situation where we are, a lot of our business goals and sustainability goals were set to 2020. So we were in a position where we'd already started to think about post-2020 goals and started to set them. But we looked at where could we be credible and what was needed today, and was there anything we were missing in terms of driving a green, clean, inclusive, society, and how to emerge and build back better. And one thing we recognized was, in terms of green, the goals really did matter, and we had to be able to deliver them as a business. And what was still important were areas like water. But in the pandemic, I think we all know, with the simple things around sanitation and hand washing, that showed that that is a critical part of probably some things are going to stay post-pandemic. How do we make sure that we're playing an active role, not just for access to safe, clean drinking water for the beverage business, but for community, for sanitation? How do we go further in the supply chains and partner with others to share our learning? And so while we're very proud of the work we've done over the last 10 years in water, and we did meet the water goal, even a little bit ahead of schedule, and we haven't stopped, we know we need to do more to move into that regenerative aspect that you're talking about, to really be able to do more across the higher risk areas and across the areas of scope outside of the beverage business. And clean, how do we accelerate and do more in terms of a world without waste? We know that we have a real accountability in terms of the plastic pollution issue, and we've been focused on the circular economy, and we've set goals to be 100% recyclable, 100% collection, make sure we're driving the circular economy. We've invested in partnerships and innovations, and frankly, it's not enough. Right now, we're seeing that with a collection that has slowed down due to the lockdowns and the pandemic. How do you make sure that you're also creating innovations where you're designing in better sustainable ways to touch brands or to live our lives while we design out the waste? An example of that is, we know that with people not being able to really, or wanting to touch things anymore, surfaces, because of COVID, how did we reinvent some of our businesses, and how do we move to packageless systems? Well, we already had our freestyle equipment, which is the new way we've been bringing our fountain business to life in terms of having, sugar-free options, 120 plus beverages available at the touch of a button. Well, we said, well, the touch of the button is not going to be enough, and people need to bring their own vessels to use their own containers if they want to. And so during the pandemic, we innovated with multiple partners and different technologies and our customers to bring to life over 10,000 new pieces of equipment that are now touchless systems where you can bring your own vessel. And so you just put it on your phone, you press your app, it pours out your beverage of whatever you want. What are the other applications for that outside of the beverage business? How can we share that with others, and how can we drive scale? And how do we make sure that then when the lockdowns are done and the second or third rounds of this, which I hope not, and I pray for a lot of people in this, that things continue to improve? How do you make sure you're there to ensure that the collection is still happening and that people are driving still a circular economy where the waste exists? How do you prevent the waste from even getting into the wrong places to make sure that you're building that infrastructure? There's a lot that can be done during the pandemic, during this time. And back to inclusive, I know this might shock some people when I say that sometimes I believe regulation can be good. I know businesses don't always love regulation. In this case, I think we might need more of it because it creates a standard playing field. And so I know that that is probably, a dream to have global regulation in this space, but the more consistency we can put into how we define ESG and the targets, how we're driving progress, the transparency behind where maybe we need to improve and have some stumbling blocks, because the more transparent, the more I believe people will weigh in and say, well, I have this idea, or I have this technology, how can we help you improve? Because that is what I've seen, is not a shortage of even, our communities weighing in and saying, I want you to be better. I'm willing to give you all the time to improve. And I even have some ideas for you if you're stuck. But they can only do that if they can have transparency into what we're trying to achieve. And if we have that two-way conversation and we're truly listening back to that inclusive nature. So, I know I've gone on way too long and I want to give time to the other panelists, but to really, truly, just to wrap it up, green, clean, inclusive has to be across all facets of industry, business, government, civil society. How do we all do this together? And how do we ensure we're transparent and reporting out not just the things that we can do well and where we're making progress, but the areas where we know we need some help? And then how do we invest in those places and drive, a collaborative effort across the world?
Yeah, thank you. There's no doubt in my mind that each one of you could give an hour-long masterclass in some of this stuff. And I think some of the points that you brought up that I thought were really interesting is, some of this stuff, this kind of pressure test that we're all facing as big companies and small companies is driving innovation. It's driving creativity. Not always the way we want it to, but it's coming up. We're coming up with new ideas. And some of the things you mentioned are going to stick. Touchless opportunities to transact or to engage are going to stay here. They're not going away. The ability to bring technology so that we can all work remotely when we have to. Those are investments companies should have been making, probably. Now they had to. That's going to stick. So Rakhi, I'll turn it over to you, and then look forward to hearing, because finance and insurance touch every company, every sector, every geography, and then I'll come back around with some more specific questions about things that might be changing or sticking. So, Rakhi.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so one thing I think COVID has done is to prove to every company and investor that ESG does matter. It does create value, because I think and that's especially true for at Liberty. We have most of our employees working from home, and I don't think that would have been possible had we not invested in building that infrastructure that is needed at the core to support good, inclusive employee engagement, etc. And infrastructure. So when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not just talking about IT. Yes, we had built up IT, the cloud, etc., that allowed for our employees to work from home. But they also focused front and center on employee comfort, right? So there was a push to see, do employees have the infrastructure at home? Do they have the chairs? Do they have the computer, the monitors, etc.? And those were shipped to employees who needed that infrastructure at home to be able to work from home. That's an example of how the employee focus really pushed and got the company to think about such issues. I would also say that employee engagement, there was a huge focus. We continue to have that focus on employee engagement, but at Liberty, for example, every month we test employee, we get a score for employee engagement. And as an employee, I have to answer 2 questions. Are you motivated to do your job? And would you recommend Liberty for a place to work? And through the pandemic, we continued to do that exercise, and we see that as a forward-looking metric. So it allows for us to identify dips if from a historic perspective, month to month. And if we see a dip in any of the teams, we have human resources step in and support managers and employees to get that back up. Right, so it becomes a forward-looking tracking mechanism to allow for intervention at the right time. And that has really helped through COVID, because we've been able to see how employees are engaged through the process. I would also say another thing that COVID has done, every company talks about values, but COVID has tested the values, right? It's also given companies the platform to make those decisions based on those values that companies had, until it's not just words on a paper. And so the fact that I think many of you have talked about how your CEOs, and Penny, you talked about how your CEO came out and made a statement. Our CEO also reached out to our employees, right? And that's because it was about the right thing to do. And if there's any doubt, you point to the values. These are the values we've talked about. And yes, they were on paper, but COVID has helped us bring that front and center. So I think if anything, ESG, which always has been important at Liberty, it makes it even more important, I think, not only for our company, for every company, and I think out there for the economy in general. And so when we talk about building back, and you're building back clean, green, inclusive, these are things that I think every company at this point is thinking about. And I'd like to focus a bit on climate now, because that is a large part of the big challenge we have, even with the pandemic. I think the fact that we have a huge challenge as citizens of the world facing us, and how we're going to address it. When it comes to financial services, what's interesting is my colleagues here, a lot of their emissions are from the scope 1, scope 2, right? And for us, it's a large part of it is in our supply chain, or our book of business, which is the underwriting book of business or the investment book of business. And, we've been doing a lot in terms of building out our sustainability portfolios, etc. But the reality is you need a more strategic approach approach to how you're going to really support the transition, an economic transition. You mentioned how we touch almost every sector out there. And there are people out there who believe that, you know, insurance companies should start the transition today and stop insuring certain parts of the economy because they're not viable. But when you think about the role that insurance plays in the marketplace and how integrated it is in the financial ecosystem, you, for example, cannot get, even an individual cannot get a loan to buy a house if they don't have insurance. Same thing with companies, right? So I think we're thinking of it from a responsible transition. And we think that immediate transition will result in a lot of financial chaos in the financial markets, which is not responsible. So that has really led us to focus on how we can build back better. And I think for us, we've thought of ESG front and center first as an opportunity, or climate change as an opportunity, not necessarily only a risk that needs to be mitigated. And I think my colleagues on the panel have given some great examples. But we are thinking of it as, how do we lift all boats? Because that's what needs to happen. If I need to clean up my supply chain or my book of business in the portfolio, or I have to help all my portfolio companies get better. That doesn't just include the large caps who are represented today, but the mid caps, the small caps, because they are also our customers and clients. So we're looking at insurance stewardship, not just asset stewardship, but insurance stewardship, working with companies. The other area, as I talked about, was building up the solutions book of business, or the sustainable book of business, investing in green and insuring green. And then there's that risk mitigation aspect of what's your current book of business and what can you address. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples, actually. One is we have a coal divestment policy by 2023. Thermocoal, and our insurance underwriters came up with a coal company who would typically hit that, would be defined by, as we've defined it in the policy, as a company that you would probably not have in your portfolio. But the opportunity was helping the company transition, and so it was for a renewable or a green investment that the coal company was making to transition. And for us, that is responsible transition. Yes, it's a coal company, but it is transitioning its own business. And that's the area where we feel it's important for us to play a role in and not just reject it. So that's one example. And the other example I'd like to give is that of, you know, we recently invested in Jupiter, a company, a data analytics company that gives you hyper-local risk information on climate change from physical risk perspective. And that's an example where we can use that technology to support our customers, our clients, from a stewardship perspective, to give them insights into their own activities and risks. And then it also allows for us to mitigate risks while allows us to invest for the future. So that's how we're thinking about it at Liberty.
Thanks, Rakhi. I mean, one takeaway I have from listening to you, you guys are leaders of strategies, right? I think, you know, and you're leaders of business strategies, and you're helping drive your business. And I hope the people in the audience are picking up on, you know, there's a lot of things that you guys have under your umbrella. But these are business strategies. Sometimes you use clean, green, and inclusive. Sometimes you use sustainability or ESG. But you guys could talk about initiatives for months, but you guys are leading strategies for global companies. And it's really interesting, I think, especially for younger people that might be in the audience, to see the ability that you have on a sustainability, ESG, marketing, public policy, forestry career track. It's pretty amazing to listen to you all on here. I'm gonna try to transition into Q&A pretty quickly, just so, because I know people want to ask questions. So this will be a little bit of a lightning round. You don't all have to answer. The first question is going to be a little bit more, binary, and it has to do with funding, right? I mean, one of the questions that first comes up, it always comes up in these panels, is during this pandemic. I forget which one of you mentioned it. It might have been Sophie, but frankly, in February and March, every company I ever talked to basically froze every discretionary spend they could, right? Like, we don't know we have to like stop what we can and let's see, make sure we preserve our cash and our position. But now that you've gone through this a couple months, we can just kind of go around, you can just speak it. You know, has your sustainability initiatives budget, now these are things probably more environmental sustainability, you know, packaging, environmental climate. Has it been reduced, sustained, or have you seen places where it's been increased or maybe reallocated? I'll start with you, Sophie.
Sure. It's a great question. I'm sure everybody's thinking about it. I think for us, our sort of recognition about, as I mentioned before, the importance of investing in natural capital for the long-term future looks different in different parts of our business and our value chain. We have not said we're putting the brakes on the investments. We still need to follow through, and it comes back to the values that Rakhi mentioned. We really still need to follow through on the work we're doing in forest stewardship, on the investments we're making with partners to deliver the outcomes we're seeking in this long-term scenario. You know, I think part of why that's an easy orientation for us is that unlike some other types of agriculture that are kind of crops grown on short-term rotations and you might get a couple of harvests in a year, you know, forests are a long-term value proposition. As a forest landowner, I might harvest my forest once in my lifetime in order to send my kid to college or, you know, put a down payment on a house or retire. So I think that helps us have a long-term perspective on the investments we're making in that space. I think just one other kind of comment to that is that there's no doubt that right now we are trying to be as fiscally responsible as everybody else. And so we're thinking about what's the low-hanging fruit. We have tremendous human resources and human capital, tremendously good subject matter experts. How can we leverage them to do things like water use reduction in terms of our operations? How can we think about how we're going to advance on some of our goals without immediately turning to large capital investment solutions there? So I would say in the short term, just like everybody else, we're not putting the brakes on the initiatives, but we're trying to be creative. And as Bea mentioned, innovation's got to play a role in that. And being able to innovate with the power of the people we have in our company is kind of our first line of defense under the current economic environment.
Yeah. Penny, I can assume the UPS budgets have gone up in the short term just to do the job, but what about the sustainability? What do you think?
So I would just say in general, I haven't seen an impact on budget so far, and we've seen an increase in certain areas. For example, we sort of have some funding for the racial justice work we were doing, things like that. But what we have seen is that the uncertainty going back again about what's temporary, what's structural, in terms of longer term investments, we're taking an opportunity to review that for a moment to say, okay, you know, we've accelerated down 10, 20 years. So for example, work from home. You know, UPS was not a work from home company. Well, we discovered during the pandemic that for all the office workers suddenly weren't coming to the office. There were some things there that, you know, we've discovered are cost savings. And so now we're looking at, you know, do we really need everybody coming to the office? Do we need to be investing in buildings, larger parking structures? What we're seeing is that those are things that we're able to kind of pull back. And that's going to have a sustainability impact for us, as well as a work-life balance, happiness for employees.
Yeah. This is definitely a prioritization exercise, whether we wanted it or not, right? Bea, what are you thinking? Are you seeing in the budget area?
Well, so we only paused our advertising, which I know did not make us popular with some of our, you know, advertising partners. But the reality is we needed that money to increment in terms of the community and sustainability, because that's where we saw that we needed to do more. At this time, we launched our science-based targets and climate. We incremented and spent $100 million plus from our foundation and communities around whether it was meals for families who were now at home, who typically a lot of those families would have had their children fed at the school. How did you make sure that they were being fed at home and those needs were met? To additional resources to the Red Cross to make sure that blood drives were taking place, or even donations into the informal collection systems and to the NGOs supporting that business because of the recyclers really needing to make sure that those cleanup efforts were going to be ready to go once the lockdowns were done. So we actually incremented those budgets in terms of the community and the people, in addition to supporting our employees as they work from home. So our employees were able to have a few choices. They could go to their, sign up to go to their local offices to get their chair, their monitors, or they received a stipend in terms of, or a dollar amount in terms of where they were to buy the things that they needed to work from home to make it a little bit less stressful. And so there's a variety of things that we've done, but in the ESG space and in terms of sustainability, we dialed up the efforts there, and we also incremented the work in terms of the community and the dollars and the investment, as well as in the innovations to look forward. But a lot of that came from, we stopped in other places that we felt, were not the right place to spend today. And my only frustration I'll say is it continues to be a frustration of no one really knows all the work Coca-Cola does, because we don't tell the story for a variety of reasons in a way that, because if you're not advertising, you're not telling your story. So everyone always says, so what are you guys doing again? And I'm like, let's just go to the website. But you'll see it on the website. We were very transparent because people were asking. They said, what are you all doing? So it's on there, including the dollars we've been spending.
Yeah, I know every company, not every company, but a lot of the companies I've been talking to, they have made the investment in DE&I, right? A lot of my friends, that were looking are now employed. So that's been there, but it's been interesting to watch it on the sustainability side. Rakhi, how about Liberty Mutual?
Yeah, no, ESG is a priority growth area for the firm, and we actually have an 8-person sustainability team. I don't know how many people actually do have 8 people in their sustainability team. We have not made any changes to that budget, and one thing about Liberty is if it's identified as a priority, it's funded like a priority. So I think we're very happy with, and much like others have mentioned, where we've made savings. So for example, in travel, we've had huge savings that has been put towards making sure that infrastructure is sent to the employees so that they can work from home, etc.
No, that's great. Okay, one more, at least one more lightning round question. And this one is interesting because this comes up a lot. And you guys we all use the terms. I've heard the SDGs, I heard the UN. We talked a little bit about Climate Week, science-based targets. I think Rakhi mentioned. All right, there's a lot out there. SDGs, GRI, which ones have you hung your hat on primarily? And you can give me more than one or two. I mean, more than one. But this is a big question, especially with TCFD popping up and all these other things. Again, let's go in reverse order. Rakhi, what are the one or two of these external frameworks you guys are saying, we like these at Liberty Mutual?
Right. So TCFD definitely is core for us from a climate perspective. And I think a lot of people think it's just a reporting framework. For us, it's also a strategic framework. How do you think about climate, and it shapes the climate narrative? So that's the first one. I would say that we start with SASB because of the materiality focus, the investor focus, but we are also looking at GRI. So we're in the process of conducting our materiality assessment from a stakeholder perspective, and some of that has been informed. We've identified core areas, and that's been informed by the GRI because GRI has been there for a long time. But I would say those 3 are core for us as some of the reporting frameworks.
That's great advice. All right, Dee.
So for us, very similar. We've been filling out GRI and CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, for many years, and those are still core, and we believe in those, as well as TCFD over the last couple of years has increasingly become more important. In SASB, we have a seat at the table, and we're in discussions right now. We know that our investors want us to fill that out, and we will. We've just been looking at what does that mean for us, and how do we ensure that we're representing the data, because we also represent our bottling system. So a lot of our goals and targets are set enterprise-wide, so making sure that we're filling out accurately, as we know that some of our publicly traded bottling partners will also be filling this out.
No, thanks. I know my team that's still at Campbell and my old team at Intel, again, it's similar things, CDP forever, GRI, following some of the investor screens, but almost always now putting in either including a UN Global Compact cross-reference, a SASB cross-reference, a map of SDG work, right? So you can see it, really trying to check as many boxes as we can for the investors and those stakeholders. Penny? You're on mute, Penny.
So we have 4 SDGs that we use as kind of a framework or a base. We've done GRI for many, many years, and we've done a SASB for the first time this year. We did our first SASB release, and we're continuing to explore some of the others. So for us, we constantly look at the different models and determine what, but we've been a long-time GRI, now doing SASB, continuing to look at the landscape as it evolves. It is a little complex, I would say. Going back to the global standard front, it would not so, it's, and I think for different industries, it's got different implications. So each of these different frameworks. So it's complicated to look at for a transportation company in particular sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. Sophie?
Yeah, I echo what others have said. I think GRI has been something we've long reported to, and it has allowed us to tell our whole story. Shockingly, not everybody wants to read 127 pages of our GRI compliant global citizenship report. So I think the challenge for all of us is that it takes a tremendous amount of work to report and produce that. And the question is, what's the value proposition on the other end for those key stakeholders? We also report to CDP, who has started to incorporate some of the TCFD compliant kind of criteria there. But I would just say, you know, we are trying to find the best possible frameworks to tell our story to all of our key stakeholders, and we share B's frustration in that people obviously often have more emotion about forests than they do about the box that their Amazon order has arrived in. And so being able to convey the story of sustainable forestry on a box is really pretty hard. So we're looking for ways to do that to all the right audiences. And I think that I'm hopeful that some of the recent efforts that we're seeing by some of the big accounting firms to kind of come together, as well as some of the reporting frameworks, to start to say, hey, actually, maybe we should harmonize these so that it's a level playing field. Everybody can sort of dial into one or a couple of reporting frameworks, and that'll meet the needs of key stakeholders. That would be a delightful development. So I think we're kind of teetering on the edge of hoping we see something in that space before we commit to a dozen new reporting frameworks in the next few years.
Yeah, the last reference to the World Economic Forum work is an interesting, I think that's a nice set of frameworks. It does, again, people complain because it cuts across all of them and kind of picks and chooses, but I do like it. It's simple and it's pretty straightforward. Okay, we're wrapping up here. There's not a ton, I'm not gonna be able to get to all the questions, but I'd like to go around and because of who you are and what you guys do, one tip or one thing that you've changed in a good way as a leader, right? In this remote environment, COVID environment, maybe the way you work with your team, maybe something you've seen another leader do. What's one thing that's changed and that you've had to change as a leader to be more effective in this environment? Now, this will be quick because we're going to go run out of time here, but I'll just go back to you, Sophie, and start with you.
Yeah, I think there's so much good stuff out there and so much fantastic leadership coming through. One thing that I've done is pulled in my team and an extended team to, it was once a week and now it's once every few weeks, just to have a lunchtime Zoom. You know, let's talk to each other about what you're doing this weekend, what life looks like. Let's talk about how you're feeling and how things in the world around you are impacting you. So we tend to stay away from most sustainability stuff and just try and connect. And I think that's critically important because we're all over the place.
Great tip. How about you, Rakhi?
Yeah, pretty much. So my challenge has been that I've also onboarded, and my entire team has onboarded at the same time during COVID. So I haven't really met them in person at all. What we do is actually just make space. So the two things that I've done is, one, I've had to make a space to connect probably more and not every day if possible, so that we get to know each and have that empty time to just talk about what you would talk about if you were in the office. And I think the second bit is be a little bit more open and personal and create time to ask, how are you doing? Tell me about your kids. Are you managing? How are you doing? You know, with all the other, and creating that space. And I think the firm has managed to create space to let employees talk about how they're feeling and the challenges they're facing.
Okay, and quickly, Penny and then B.
So no meetings between 12 and 1 in your time zone, no meetings after 6, no meetings after 8, no meetings on Fridays. That's open time. We have a WhatsApp feed where you put pictures of your kids, your dogs, your weekend plans, what you watched on Netflix. And for those of us that are in the same city, we did a socially distanced kayaking trip recently just to get outside and be together.
That's great. And B.
And more of the same. So we have something called Focused Fridays, and it's to give people the permission to not have a series of back-to-back Zoom meetings or panels, and really to invest in their own learning. So something called Marketplace Opportunity, where people could actually sign up to take on things that were of either personal passion, interest, or development. And it's really been a wonderful way for people to engage in areas outside of their day-to-day.
That's great. I mean, the opportunity for continuing education is tremendous at this point. I just want to say thanks. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We covered a ton of ground. You guys are great. I'm going to turn it back over to Liam to roll right along with Transform USA 2020. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Sophie, Penny, Beckham, Rakhi, for a cracking start to today's discussion. Some great ideas shared, especially at the end. I've got a few there I might take to my team as well. So thank you, guys. And thank you to those that have submitted questions through the session. We will continue through this vein throughout today's broadcast and tomorrow's broadcast. So do get those questions in. Next up, we have another co-created session with another lead partner of the event, TrueStar Energy. First off, we'll have a 6-minute presentation from Adam Kumar, President and CEO of TrueStar Energy. And then I'll be joined by Adam, his colleague Mark Costel, Senior Advisor at TrueStar Energy, and Kristen Sullivan, Partner at Deloitte, for a 40-minute Q&A discussion. So do watch the presentation and do get the questions in during the presentation, and I'll get around to as many of them as I can. But for now, here's the presentation.